buonasera.
Buonasera.
How you
Come
doing?
stai? Tutto bene? I'm fine, thank you.
Julia, why don't you introduce yourself while I pull up the screen?
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Julia Charity. I've been living in Rome for around about 20 years, a little bit on and off, but I fell in love with Italy when I was about 19 and took a gap year here, which led me to change my degree course. And I would have been studying English literature, but I decided to study Italian art, literature and history at the University of Hull, which is northeast England. Third year of my degree was spent in Rome, back here again. And after I finished, I came back here and just kind of fell into tour guiding. It just kind of happened. So that was, yeah, a long time ago. So my husband's a chef. We have a restaurant in Trastevere. So yeah, I think here on a permanent basis at this point, 2 children, a cat and a dog and a goldfish. By the way, I just saw a cat come in the living room, so look out.
You literally have, I mean, you are ruling Rome. You're married to a chef. You have 2 children. You're a tour guide. I mean, you have it all. Picture number 1.
Right, so given that we have a massive amount to cover, we're going to start right at the beginning, okay? Before the beginning even, with Aeneas and his flee from Troy. Now we actually need to go a bit further back than this moment here. So if we go back to about the 12th century before Christ and a huge party in a king's house, Agamemnon's house, we have all of the divinities present at this party. It's a massive feast. It's a wedding feast, okay? So we're talking gods, goddesses, demigods, river gods, nymphs, muses, the whole 9 yards. And one goddess didn't get the invite. She was the goddess of trouble, okay? So trouble doesn't get the invite, but she goes, because obviously she's gonna go. She takes a gift with her. It's a golden apple, and on the apple, the words te caliste, for the fairest, are written. And she tosses that apple amongst the guests. You know it's going to cause trouble, okay? A divine festivity. So 3 goddesses break into a bit of a tussle, you know, heads getting yanked, nails are out, it's not pretty. Zeus steps up and says, let's find someone to pick amongst you. He doesn't want to be the guy to judge the 3 ladies. I mean, that would be problematic for him. So he looks elsewhere for an impartial party and comes up with this guy called Paris, otherwise known as Orlando Bloom, if you've seen the movie. And Paris is given the apple and he's told to pick. So the goddesses, of course, they're not going to let him pick without helping the decision-making process. So they're going to bribe him, right? The winning bribe is that of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Venus in the Roman, by the way. And she, knowing the Trojan, right? She is Aeneas's mother. You're looking at the son of Venus here. She knows her Trojans. She's had a fling with a Trojan prince. There he is on the shoulders of Aeneas. And so she's familiar with the peoples. She says, you give me that apple and I will give you the hottest chick on the face of the earth. She'll be yours, okay? So we have a winner, right? The other 2 bribes, yeah, this Trojan didn't care less about those. So the end result is the hottest chick, Helen, right, nicking off with Paris to Troy, and a 10-year war. So it's a massive war that erupts. Now, Venus, she's going to be on Team Troy. All the other gods are on Team Greek. Okay, we'll call it Greek, but lack of. So the other gods, they're a bit frustrated after 10 years, and Venus is holding tight over Troy, right? Preventing the Greeks from winning. So they give her a bribe, right? It's all about bribery, apparently. They say, you let go of Troy and we will let your son with your old lover Anchises flee the city, taking with him his son in turn, as you see the beautiful figure of this young boy here by the legs of Aeneas. We've got Iulus is his name, and they can go forth and found a new nation and perpetuate the divine bloodline of the goddess Venus, right? So she's thinking, this doesn't sound bad, right? But what else? Give me your best shot. So she holds out for the real good stuff. They say, the citadel that your son will found, right? Wherever you choose, Venus, you can choose where. It doesn't matter if people live there already. It's all good. You know, your son will fight them and beat them up and win. That citadel will become, with time, the greatest nation that has ever existed on the face of the earth to rule all other nations, right? Through histories to infinity and beyond. And Yeah, that's what happened, because you know what I'm talking about, right, Angelo? You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do.
City of Rome is the end result of all of this. I love this painting. It's in the Borghese Gallery. If anyone comes to Rome, it's worth a visit. It's by Barocci, but you can always hear the crackling of the fire in the background, aren't you there? The flames as they burn. So yes, they end up on the Italian peninsula. This is preordained. The goddess Venus chose pretty much nearby here, right? So Aeneas arrives, has a bit of a fight with the people that lived here already, right? Beats them up and wins. Founds a citadel called Lavinium. His son Iulus, this young fella here, will found Alba Longa, and the descendants will be Romulus and Remus, so I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of. So that's about a 400, 500 year disparity, but that's okay, no one cares, we just kind of fluff over that. If you were to go up to an ancient Roman and say, hey fella, who's your forefather? All right, and we're around the time of Augustus, let's say, then you're not going to hear Romulus and Remus are the main story, okay? At that point in time, the main deal is going to be Aeneas, okay? Imagine a council, 4th century BC, okay, and all the superpowers are there. And it's at a time when there's a lack of power in the Mediterranean, so there's like a power vacuum. Imagine, you know, the Romans rocking up and saying, we're going to rule over all of you, because a couple of twins had a fight about 300 years ago. No one's going to buy that, right? It's got to be more important than that. So, you know, Augustus is going to need something bigger, right? We'll get to Augustus a bit later. But so the real deal is Aeneas, the founding father of the nation. But by the Middle Ages, Romulus and Remus will have returned sort of en vogue in the story there. The she-wolf here you find in the Capitol Hill. Over on the Capitol in the museums there, you could go and see this. But there's a bit of contention as to whether it's actually an antique statue, right? So there is an idea that it dates to around the 5th century BC, but then there's also a notion that it could in fact entirely be dated to the Middle Ages, but we won't get too deeply into that. Romulus and Remus, okay, the twins, they're sons of a Vestal virgin. That's not supposed to be, is it, a Vestal virgin? So yeah, a bit problematic. Well, the story goes that she defends herself. Apparently this was a popular story in antiquity, Angela. The young maidens going around for an evening's entertainment and saying when they come home with a bun in the oven that it was a god. It would get you out of some hot water. So anyway, she said, it's not my fault that I have a bun in the oven. She was, you know, a Vestal virgin, so there would have been big trouble if she hadn't managed to find a good excuse. So she says it was the god Mars. He's the reason that I am with child. They let her off the hook, right? The popular story is, you know, the twins, they're placed in a casket and floated off down the river Tiber, kind of Moses styley. They wash up on shore in a valley in between a bunch of hills, right, kind of roundabouts where we are, and they're picked up by a she-wolf who suckles the twins. This is always where the story loses traction, I think, with some people. It's a bit of a dodgy story. But anyway, picked up by a she-wolf. And so they're suckled by the she-wolf, and a few days later, Faustulus, this swineherd who lived on the Palatine Hill just next door to where the she-wolf's den was. So he comes across them and he goes, oh, that's, you know, I think we should. So he brings them in as his own, right? Takes the kids in, brings them up with his wife, Acalarentia, by the way. She apparently had previously been in public service. Latin nickname for such a lady was a she-wolf. So there's where the twins were suckled. Probably was a she-wolf, but anyway, they're brought up on the Palatine Hill, and then they want to found their own nation. So they're going to fight between each other, the twins. One takes one hill, the Aventine, the other takes the Palatine, and they're going to wait for a sign from the gods to indicate which one of the two will found a new city. On the Aventine Hill, Remus sees 6 vultures flying across the sky above his head, and as he looks up, sort of thinking, yay, it's me. At the same time, Romulus next door on the Palatine also sees birds, but 12 of them, so double trouble. And he sort of thinks, you know, it's him. So Romulus doing the dance, I'm going to found Rome on the Palatine. Remus comes up for a bit of a fight, crosses the valley to confront his brother, right? Romulus, meantime, has been building the city walls. He hasn't gotten particularly far, you know. Remus says, you know, what do you call those? That's a pathetic attempt there. And they're not going to protect you from anyone, are they? And he steps over the boundaries of Rome. With that, he's killed by his absolutely infuriated brother. So high levels of tension with sibling rivalry back in the 8th century before Christ. And that was in 753 BC. Now, Rome was born as a monarchy. And it would survive as a monarchy for about 245 years. So we have 7 kings of Rome. And by the end of it all, yeah, the monarchy is not working so much anymore. All right. So that's a very quick sort of spatter through 245 years. But there's a bit of not a black hole, but almost with this whole time period. There were probably more kings or less time. Anyway, we hit 509 BC. Now, in 509 BC, we have this last king of Rome. His name is Tarquinius Superbius, right? And you might think of him as being a pretty cool guy, right? The name's Tarquin the Superb, except no, that's not a name you give yourself. It means Tarquin the Arrogant, and his son, his name is Sextus. He's a general of the armies. And he is off with the other generals at the end of the day, having beaten up a few neighbors. They haven't gotten very far at this time. We're in the 6th century BC, so we're just outside of Rome, okay? And so they've, sat around the campfire, talking the talk, a little bit of, locker room talk going on. And it turns to who has the purest wife. So the first guy stands up and says, my wife is so pure. All right, now she's at home knitting me socks. The next guy stands up and goes, no, my wife is purer than yours, sir. My wife is, she's scrubbing the kitchen floor with a toothbrush. She knows I like a clean kitchen floor. This other guy called Collatinus stands up. And everyone kind of knows who he is and who his wife is. Her name is Lucrezia. And he says, my wife is purer than all of yours put together. What are we even talking about? Okay, so the guys are like, well, we're only a few clicks away from Rome. Should we go check on the wives? So they do. They go to the first wife's house, right? She's not really doing what she's supposed to be doing. Pizza's ordered, DVDs popped in, girlfriends are over. All right, next wife's house. She's not really scrubbing a kitchen floor. Although the cards are out on whether she wasn't on her hands and her knees. The next wife's house is Lucrezia's, and she's doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing. The son of the king, he's there and he sees all of this, right? And remember that pure wives, that's basically, that's hot. So the son of the king, he looks at Lucrezia and he thinks, ooh, I wouldn't mind a chat with this lady. So he waits for all the other fellas to disappear back off to warfare. He goes to the house of Lucrezia, knocks on the door. He's kind of, let in. He's the son of the king. I mean, he's going to be allowed entry. He's given a room for the night. And later on that night, he pops up to her bedroom. He enters and says, you're going to play the game I want you to play with me right now. And if you don't, I'm going to kill a slave and say that I caught him forcing his game on you, which will ruin your household name. Okay, so she kind of has to go along with this. And after he's left, he sort of slings back the Parthian shot, and don't you forget what I will do if you ever tell anyone what has passed here tonight. So he thinks, job's done. He's back off to warfare. At the end of all of this, right, the menfolk making their way back into Rome after, the victory, whatever mini war they were fighting, right? So they're entering Rome. Everybody is in the forum to welcome them, but not the wife of Collatinus. She's not there. And so Collatinus, with his best friend, right, this guy called Lucius Junius Brutus, right? We have the image of who he is, so we can all see. Now he looks like a bit of a grumpy dude, right? He's kind of got a bit of a grump on there. He apparently was a bit of a joker, though. Apparently this guy had a light heart in this period we're talking about. So he's with his best friend, Collatinus, and they're riding into Rome. They can't see the wife of Collatinus anywhere, and they kind of go, let's go and see if she's okay. They go back to the household, and they find her a mess. Obviously, she's been destroyed by what's happened to her. And the minute she sees her husband, it all comes spewing out of her. She says, this is what the son of the king did to me. This is what he said he would do if I told anyone what happened. And now it's all over for her. She grabs her husband's dagger and she plunges it into herself. So, very serious moment. But this is something that, it's the only way for her to get out of the situation with the family's honor. So, well, Lucius Junius Brutus, a dark look comes across his face, and he picks up the body of Lucrezia and he carries her through the forum in front of the whole city and up to the speaker's platform, where he addresses the crowd and he says, are we going to permit this to happen anymore? The monarchy have destroyed the purity of our city. Do you see the metaphor? It's quite nice, isn't it? And that is the moment that the Romans kicked their monarchs out and swore they would never permit another king. So yeah, they kept that promise to a degree.
Jules, that's an amazing story. I mean, putting a personal event onto the public's face and splattering it in front of them in a very cruel, bloody, gory way, in a way, and saying, this cannot be permitted anymore. We've suffered this for almost 300 years. Now we need to step into something more similar to a democracy rather than a dictatorship. It's pretty advanced. I mean, this is 2,500 years ago.
It is, yes, it is. And the democracy that they became would be just an amazing entity in its beginnings. But the problem with any type of government, even the most respectable democracies, is that they eventually fall into decay, don't they? So, and that is what happened. So we have a long period of time as Rome as a democracy, don't we? So 509 BC, we actually have things working pretty nicely, you know, down to around about the 1st century BC. So that is where things start falling apart. Now, a lot happened in the meantime, right? The Roman Empire has grown through the Mediterranean and has become magnificent, as it was preordained that it would. But we really want to stop for a moment in this time period where there's this very famous face. This is Julius Caesar. So he was born into a situation where that democracy had flailed. Okay, so it had become dirty. It was the patrician families that ruled. You know, it was like the 1%. I mean, it's a very simple parallel to draw, but so it wasn't really working. And you end up in a situation where this man, born a man of the people, right? He was born of a noble family, but amongst the people, they didn't have the money they once had as a family here. But Julius Caesar, he manages to make it into government. Now, we could spend hours on Caesar alone, right? So we're just gonna cut to the quick, right? So Caesar, he in fact managed to get into government through the cursus honorum, the root of honor, making it as consul in 59 BC to represent the people that were no longer represented. Okay, now the Roman Republic basically was a situation whereby you had the 2 consuls every year that changed out, and the Senate, who were, when there were kings, the Senate were the advisors to the kings, right? But they became the advisory body themselves to the tribunes, supposedly. In any case, Caesar has made it as consul, almost like half a president, if you will. So he, in 59, the next year, 58, as a proconsul, would have to leave Rome and do something somewhere else. He chose to go to Gaul, right, as a proconsul. So no one man could get too much power. This is the idea. You've been president, okay, off you go. You can't be president again for a really long time, is the idea. He conquers Gaul, okay? That's really cutting the story short. And he wrote a lot of books about this, okay? So you could check out the commentaries if you wanted to. That he in fact sent the commentary writings home, you know, so around once a year, and it's believed that they were written with the intent that they should be propaganda for him whilst he's not in Rome. The idea would be he's being forgotten about in his proconsulship, but in reality, everyone's remembering. Okay, so it's like they'd be read on the rostrum in the Roman Forum once a week. It's like watching Game of Thrones once a week. You're like, well, new episode of Caesar in Gaul, I'm going to be there. So people would remember, yeah? So when he returns, right, he returns to the Italian peninsula. And he has understood, though, that the Senate in Rome have been frustrated by him because he's gotten too big for his boots, all right? He's gotten too powerful in as much as the people loved him. The army were on his side. So this is too much danger for those who are still in Rome. And the Senate want to get rid of him. So he's asked to step down from his proconsulship. The idea being that he'd be prosecuted, right? That would stand very nicely with many of those senators in Rome, get rid of him. He talks to his men and sort of convinces them to support him in a bid as a dictator, right? So he's going to come to Rome, take power, and stand there for the people of Rome. In the meantime, when he does that, the Senate scatter, right? They flee because they know he's done it. He's arrived in Rome too quickly. They weren't ready for him. So effectively becoming a dictator, announcing himself as dictator, he he puts to rights all those senators who were against him, but not by killing them. He brings them in as his own government, and does right by the Romans. Now, there's one event I want to talk about, though, in the dictatorial rule of Caesar, because this is misleading. He was not an emperor. He was a dictator. We have to be clear about that. He was the precursor to the emperors. And the one moment I want to talk about is represented by our next image. Should be our Luperci. There he is. So there is an event going on, right? So we have Caesar in Rome, all-powerful dictator, okay? He's gotten really big for his boots. He's claimed descendancy from Romulus and Remus, and even further back than that. Does the name Julius ring a bell? I mentioned briefly the name of the son of Aeneas, Julio, all right, Iulus. So we have Julius claiming descendancy from the divine Venus, and some people were not happy with that. As we said, many signs of Caesar didn't please the Senate, and they've been sort of silenced by him at this time. So there's this public event happening. It's called the Lupercalia, the celebration of the she-wolf. And it's essentially where we have the whole city has turned out, okay? Let me just tell you 2 words about what the Lupercalia is. So we have the den of the she-wolf at the bottom of the Palatine Hill. We have the cult of the she-wolf, right? So representatives of the cult there, and everyone's dressed down into a tighty-whitey, essentially, loincloths, okay? And not only the representatives of the she-wolf, but also the magistrates of Rome would take part in this, right? They'd strip down half naked into a loincloth, and they would partake of the festivities, which consisted of, after a sacrifice took place of 2 goats and a dog, all right, they would take the pelts and dunk them in milk. And in fact, there is a version of this where it's she-wolf milk. I was wondering who milked the she-wolves. That's a dodgy job. Smooshing chicks, right? Hitting chicks with the young maidens who step up to be whacked by the she-wolf sojourn pelts in a bid to
Is it just me or everybody lost her? You lost her too. Yeah, I wonder if it's her connection. Ah, it's her connection. Okay, she'll come back in an instant. She must have lost a little broadband. There she is. Hey, Julia.
Hey.
Hey, we lost
I'm trying to
momentarily.
It was the Christmas reference, wasn't it?
I don't think you got there, actually, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What happened?
You're literally, as soon as we switched photo, or a few seconds after that, well, actually, you were at the she-wolf milk. That's when we lost you completely.
Ah, okay. Okay, so is everyone here? We're all good?
Yeah, everybody's here. We just lost you.
So weird. What's happening? Okay, well, I'm sorry.
Not your fault.
Straight back in then. So we had gotten as far as the she-wolf's milk. So young maidens stepping up to be schmooshed with she-wolf milk, yes, so that they can be rendered fertile is the idea. Okay, picture that. Politicians, Palatine Hill, running around it 3 times in tighty-whities and doing that, hitting on chicks, essentially. The whole of Rome would be there. And Caesar's using this as a forum to understand whether it's the moment for him to take one step further in his route to what presumably some people believe is kingship, monarchy. Some people think Caesar wanted to be king, okay? So he's got a little skit prepared where Mark Antony is going to step up to him, kneel in front of him, holding out what is effectively one of these, a diadem, Okay, it's a purple ribbon. It represented monarchy, and Caesar is going to see what the crowd does. Okay, so Mark Antony does just that. Caesar looks to the crowd, and apparently there were a few people there spattered into paid to cheer. So Mark Antony says, "Caesar, be our king." And Caesar looks to the crowd, and a small group of people go, "Yay, Caesar the king!" But no one else is making a noise, right? So, Caesar pushes the crown away. Mark Antony does it a second time. All right, again, the second time, the crowd are not reacting, just these people paid to cheer, presumably a bit sheepishly this time, though. And the third time, all right, that Caesar is offered the crown by Mark Antony, Caesar turns to the crowd and he says, "Let it be shown in the annals of Rome that Caesar did thrice deny the diadem." Okay, and the crowd go wild. Yeah, Caesar for dictator, Caesar for dictator. Okay, so, he declared himself dictator for life, ad perpetuum. In that moment, Cassius and Brutus, they looked at each other and went, "Yeah, no, we don't think so." And 1 month later, indeed, they put an end to the life of Caesar. So the assassination of Caesar on the 15th of March, the Lupercalia, by the way, that was the 15th of February. We get Valentine's Day from that little affair. You kind of draw the parallels yourself, right? Hitting on women and all of that, whatever. So Caesar then is out of the picture, right? You can watch the Shakespeare play if you want the details. So the thing about that is the men that killed him, the Senate, those senators against him, they didn't bank on how much the people loved him, on how much there would be a complete rejection of the old form of government. And so they had to flee Rome. Again, the Senate flee Rome, and this time it's Mark Antony, Caesar's best bud, right? And also his adopted son, Octavian, who will put rights to this. They will avenge the death of Caesar, and in 13 years, they will put to peace in the empire. They'll eventually have a squabble with each other too, though, Mark Antony and Octavian. So Mark Antony will be knocked out of the picture by 31 BC in the Battle of Actium with Cleopatra. We've all heard of that. We've all seen Liz, haven't we? Liz Taylor in the fabulous movie. But anyway, so Cleopatra, out of the picture, Mark Antony gone, and Lepidus, but no one ever cares about the third guy. We'll forget him. And you end up with, in 27 BC, Octavian, the adopted son of Caesar, right, alone, rising from the ashes of the family of Caesar. Here we have this figure that is supported by the people, at this point unique as leader in Rome. He's maneuvered himself into the position of power whereby if he steps down, the Senate will probably fall apart, okay? And then he declares he's stepping down, right? This is a smart guy. He knew you cannot take power. It has to be given to you. So he says, right, guys, yeah, have fun. I give you back your republic. And the senators went, no, don't do that. We love you. Can't you hang around? You know, be our, oh, wait, not king. What can we call him?
I don't know, starts with a C maybe.
So this is where we find our first Roman emperor. They say, be our princeps, be the first among equals. Right? In fact, the term emperor as an official title didn't really exist at this point in time. It came around quite a few decades later, but nonetheless, it was represented in the idea of be our imperator, be the man who rules over us. And he said, yeah, okay, you know, that sounds pretty good. As long as you don't call me Octavian anymore, because I did some really shady stuff as Octavian. Let's come up with a new name to represent a new era. And he changed his name to Augustus. So Augustus, first Roman emperor. Well, we've all heard of the Roman emperors. We've all had our sort of, you know, gossipy moments about them. But they're what you think of when you think of Rome, yeah? So now we've done kings, we've done the republic. The emperors we can actually do pretty quickly. First century, psychos. Second century, calm. That's the golden era. Third century, complete chaos. And at the end of complete chaos, you find a guy called Diocletian who says, this isn't really working, right? So that in the 3rd century, you had 26 emperors in 50 years. Not one of them died of natural causes. Things were not looking great, okay? So we find a change then where rule of four is invented, shall we say, a tetrarchy. So Diocletian says, let's split the empire up. That sounds like a plan. East from west, we'll have a head honcho Augustus in the east and a head honcho Augustus in the west, and an assistant Caesar in the east and an assistant Caesar in the west. And when the head honcho Augustus passes, the Caesar will become the Augustus, and so on and so forth. And it should have worked really nicely because it wasn't based on the bloodline. But it didn't work very well, right? This had worked nicely in the 2nd century with our adoptive emperors, men like Trajan and Hadrian that you've all heard of. But yeah, at this point in time, it lasted about a decade and then fell apart because of a guy called Constantine, more or less. Okay, so Constantine, first Christian Roman emperor. Everyone's heard of him. Okay, so let's move on and have a look at him, because he should be our next image. So there he is, as stands in the capital. Constantine here. We have the face of a man who is responsible for our religion in the Western world, pretty much, because if he hadn't legalized it when he did, who knows what would have happened. So Constantine here did something else, though, other than legalize Christianity. He moved the seat of power. So he took it away from the West and he took it over to the East. Constantinople, you might have heard of it. It's, you know, somewhat famous. There was a song, I think, Istanbul, Constantinople, yeah. Sorry, you'll be humming that for the next 4 hours. Anyway, so Constantine then, we love him, but we hated him. I mean, to be fair, he pretty much, put the seal on the deal. There are a million reasons why people think the Roman Empire fell, but I actually give it to this guy. It's either him or Diocletian, to be fair. Right. So Constantine, a few decades after this guy, Christianity will become the official religion. Okay, so we're talking Theodosius at the end of the 4th century. By this time, things are slowly collapsing. I mean, the Western Empire is kind of collapsing like a souffle in a cupboard. It's really becoming troublesome. The Eastern side of things is growing and becoming stronger and stronger. In fact, the East will survive for another 1,000 years as an empire, more or less. And the Roman Empire collapses completely by the official historical date, 476. Okay, and then we have the Dark Ages. So to scoot through the Dark Ages, really, because we did have a pope, so we have some knowledge about what went on in the Dark Ages, but unfortunately, perhaps not enough. To be fair, I kind of affectionately like to call it the Shady Ages. Because
they were dark for them, but they're shady for us.
Yeah. Yeah, so all joking aside, you really can't be fair about any information you have if it's only coming from one source, can you? So we only have the Christian viewpoint on much of what went on for that time period. Anyway, the papacy is rising to power. The donation of Constantine supposedly is the moment that happened. The donation of Constantine is where you find, according to some, literally the figure of Constantine saying to the Pope Sylvester I, you can have power. Here it is, take it. You can be the political leader in the Western world, and I'm just gonna, leave it at that and head off east. But really that was proved to be a fake. And it was in fact the Renaissance where we find this moment of fakery unveiled officially, shall we say, by a humanist named Lorenzo Balla. But anyway, really the deal is probably this moment came in the 8th century of power turning to the Pope. All right, so there's a documentation of the 8th century whereby it seems like there was a need for the people to turn to somebody in Rome and sort of look to him for not just spiritual leadership, but political as well. And so yes, the Dark Ages are where the Pope finds his footing, and Italy is a mess at the end of the Dark Ages. So I believe the next image will show us the ancient Roman world. So here we have antiquity, okay, a nice clean cut city with the 7 hills, yeah. If we look over to where it says Fields of Mars, Campus Martius, that's where the modern city center is. Okay, so in the Dark Ages, Rome gradually shifts. I wish I had like a time lapse of this red line kind of moving over to the other side of your screen, because this area we're looking at is very exposed, right? The hills of Rome, barbarian invaders coming at Rome from all angles. The people wouldn't have felt very safe without any protection. No military forces around in Rome. Things have kind of gone a bit wrong here. And so they want protection. And a natural solution to the problem is the river, isn't it? So move into the river. and you've got protection on 3 sides. So just under the D is where we would find, for example, the Pantheon. I think under the F, you'd find Piazza Navona, all right? So we have this gradual shift of the city centre, thank you. And that's where the heart of Rome is today. So our historical centre, which reused everything that was left over from antiquity and built into it and onto it, which is why Rome is such a mess today. In terms of citadels, it's very messy. The streets are kind of higgledy-piggledy and all sort of, you know, it is the city on top of the city. So, now, after, as we were talking about the papacy rising to some sort of power, well, after the Dark Ages, right, the official end of the Dark Ages is the year 1000. After the year 1000, that's just, yeah, historians like to be nice and neat about these things. It's not really ever that simple, but apparently in 1152, we have 5 senators meeting on the Capitol Hill again, and that counts as the first time that government had met officially in Rome since antiquity. And you end up with infrastructure, right? Things being organized to a degree again. The feudal system kicks in, and the Middle Ages sort of, yeah, so it's coming together a little bit, but it would really come together in this next era, the Renaissance. So with...
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for just 2 seconds. I mean, the way you're presenting it is that up until now, between the 8th century and 1152, you basically had chaos.
Well, not complete chaos. We had a pope, like I said, so it wasn't complete chaos. The pope kind of becomes the sovereign slowly, the political leader of this terrain, and he's kind of taking care of business in that period of time.
He's the temporal leader. I mean, not just the political leader, but
not just the political, but temporal. Yes.
Because back in the day, people needed to know how to manage their lands. Put it that way. So they needed to know who to refer to. That's the beginning of the feudal system in a way. So I wanted you to say that. So thank you.
Oh, well, yes. So, yes. So we're looking at papacy on the rise then, aren't we? And if they have been gradually on the rise in this time period, well, they really come into their own in the Renaissance. So with Pope Julius II, I think you could call him the first regal pope. So here we have a really impressive work of art by the artist Raphael, and Julius II here. Now, I never really know where to start with him because there's so much, you know, you kind of come at with him. But if we're talking about how popes became kings, well, at least in terms of the arts, this would be a keystone in the tradition. So Julius II, they called him the warrior pope. So if we've looked at an Italy that was a mess, right? Not completely, but as we said, to a degree, there's a lack of power, a lack of centralization. The Pope has kind of taken that footing in the middle of the Italian peninsula. And with this Pope is trying to establish the papal state as a full-on footing and envisioning it as the entire peninsula under the papal rule. That won't exactly happen, but he comes to a reasonable sort of, you know, amount of distance with it. So he was often off fighting somebody or other, and politically was quite the interesting figure. So he managed to regain Romagna from the Venetian side of things and bring that back under control of the papal states. And acting, I suppose, in a very regal fashion. The Pope, we all know the popes, along with the kings, are the true sponsors of the arts and push the arts into sort of, you know, whatever the capacity they can reach. So he is not to be underestimated there either. The Renaissance really wouldn't, I don't think you could say it's the Renaissance if this man hadn't been Pope. So he became Pope in 1503. He had a footing already for this with his uncle, who had been Pope previously, Sixtus IV, who's the man that built the Sistine Chapel and left his name on it. Julius II, well, there'd be a pope or two in the interim, so it wasn't a direct succession, but as monarchy sort of does have this bloodline, well, there was a touch of this with the papacy as well. There was the notion of family profiting from having somebody rise to the position of pope. In fact, when Julius II, as Giuliano della Rovere, by the way, of the oak, della Rovere, you can see Raphael has given us the beautiful oak acorn sort of symbols here, right next to the Pope's head, to represent his family. So personal, not just the successor of Peter, but his family is to be indicated here, recognized as powerful. his uncle had named 5 other cardinals as well. So imagine Sixtus IV, some sort of 25 years previous, had named 6 cardinals from his own family. Julius would name 5 of his own nephews as cardinals. So this is a big theme. In any case, we get some of the most spectacular works of art because of this man, such as Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, which I would have loved to throw an image in here as well, and one of the Raphael rooms, because Raphael didn't just paint a portrait of the Pope, giving us this beautiful image of regality. Look at his fingers. You see the rings on his fingers there. The colors. This is brilliant. I love this. The colors of faith, hope, and charity. Okay, the Christian virtues represented there, but also monarchic sort of superiority, the glory of a king with these rings on his fingers. So it's doing both jobs at the same time, representing him both as the successor of Peter, but also also a political figure par excellence in his own personage. Anyway, so he's got both Michelangelo and Raphael working at the same time in the Vatican palaces, and creating 2 areas which really represent, I think, the Renaissance to most people. When you think of the Renaissance, if you don't think of that, then I don't know what to say. So, and not to mention the stanza della Segnatura with the School of Athens, and it's very famous. Yeah. So he obviously wasn't the only Pope who took this kind of stance, this powerful stance. There's a fluttering of popes in the Renaissance. Think about the Medici popes as well, in terms of their sort of sovereignty, if you will. We have Leo X after him, and then Clement VII, and both of the Medici family directly in succession. So almost. And then from the Renaissance and the rebirth of the ancient world in the modern era, the next period along, we'll find even more amazing figures, which we haven't really even got the time to go into, so I had to skip. But Bernini, Borromini, popes like Urban VIII of the Barberini family, and I know, right? That's just too much. But sticking to our timeline.
I'm sorry, you. It's too much in 45 minutes, but
all right, we're nearly at the culmination. We're nearly finished, okay? Because the next thing that we need to turn to in our sort of crowns, popes, and politics is really the politic of Italy. Because if this pope tried to unify, well, eventually Italy would become a country, and it would do so officially in 1861, but Rome wasn't a part of it. You can't really have an Italy without a Rome, can you, at that point? Rome only came under the rule of the unified nation in 1870. So finally, Italy as one nation under one, or what form of power are we going to choose? We've looked at all sorts of different types of ruler, haven't we? I mean, but surely they learned a lesson, right? They're not gonna choose. No, yeah, they chose a king. So Italy before this, right, we talk about city-states from the Renaissance. So you've got the Papal State, you've got the Duchy of Milan, the Republic of Florence, the Republic of Venice, you have the Kingdom of Naples, which would vary in its organization anyway. But you have the Piedmont rule come the 1800s under the Savoia family. And they would be the choice eventually after the 3 main protagonists of the unification. 3 men are credited with this. Obviously, it took a lot more than 3. But Cavour, Mazzini, and Garibaldi, eventually a king would be the choice. So Italy turning to its monarchic period. This picture is really interesting because it shows us a moment that's celebrated on the 2nd of June every year. So it was celebrated just 2 days ago. And it is the moment of the celebration of the Republic of Italy. So from kings to emperors, through republic to emperors, to popes, it all bounces back around again. So I love the idea that all of this, it's cyclical. It's one big repeat, isn't it? So it happens again and again. So Italy chose finally in the referendum of 1946 on the 2nd of June, the Republic as an option. The kings had fallen decisively out of vogue because of the Second World War and the whole friendship with Mussolini business, and the Italians just didn't want kings anymore. So the vote was taken, and a victory of around 55%, the Italian peoples chose a king. So there, a republic over the kings. So there we are. I'm gonna draw it to a close.
That's a great closing. That's a great closing. We're at the 45th minute, so I want to give some time for people to ask any questions to Julia. So this is this was a great presentation. In reality, Julia, you've been here since the early 2000s, and you know that we've been asked to elect our government way too few times, or way too many, if you will. At the beginning of your stay and at the very end of your stay, we've had a lot of technocrat governments. So in reality, this is a result of 50 years of, if you will, an overly developed democracy, we're represented by over 60 parties in our houses, and we didn't get anything done. And so for the past, I don't know, how long has it been? Since the crisis, so since 2011, 2012, we've had governments succeeding each other either by coalitions or by people that we didn't elect. So who knows if we're going towards something else, you know, in that cyclical matter.
Dictatorship always follows, man. It always follows. Free choice comes dictated because they mess around too much.
Well, that's the point.
There's too much.
Because
yeah, somebody has to.
All of these populist nationalistic parties that are gaining more and more ground and popularity, you think they're going to go towards, you know, dictatorship or something like that. And we truly hope we're not going to get back to that cycle again. So people, there is a Q&A and there is a chat button. If you want to pick Julia's brain at all, feel free to do this, unless, Julia, you left them all speechless. Case. I mean, you gave us a lot to think of. Julia's popularity is probably what made people more upset than anything, because and this is going to sound really stupid. I'm sorry. I'm going to sound really stupid right now, like that typical tourist that asks the gladiator question. But I watched it 2 days ago.
Oh God.
But there's a great dialogue actually between Commodus and his sister. And they say Rome is an ideal. And the people that ruled Rome needed to, in a way, embody that ideal. And there was a time where the Senate was not enough at that. And Caesar, with all of his great power, popularity, etc., really did embody the ideal of Rome. And for us, especially in Italy nowadays, and you showed the great picture of the Victor Emmanuel monument, and you may recall that there is actually, since you are from England, at the National Portrait Gallery in Trafalgar Square, there's a painting of Garibaldi Garibaldi and the king to meet on a field up north Italy, and he gives him a statue and symbol of the unification of his hard work of 2 independence battles. And there's a subtitle to that painting, and the subtitle says, "I give you Italy, now you give me the Italians." And that is to symbolize how we, and I'm gonna correct myself, at least until COVID-19, we're not a very patriotic country. It's true. We pulled out our flags only for our World Cup. We weren't really, you know, hand onto your heart, sing your national anthem, until we found ourselves in this modern age crisis, all coming together in a very beautiful way in reality. And that's, I'm not making any sort of reference, but to go back to Caesar, he did actually embody that patriotic feeling that we probably want to feel for the country that we live in and support, you know? There's a couple of questions. Can you explain more in depth what it means by Byzantine if Rome collapsed at the end of the 5th century?
Well, the Byzantine Empire is kind of the other side of things. Rome collapsed in the west, but because there'd been the 2 powers, you kind of find one side almost rising and being successful, developing into a different format of power. Byzantine is no longer Rome anymore. In fact, it would come to reoccupy the city of Rome in the sixth century. And in fact, you often have the idea of the barbarian invaders and the Byzantines kind of standing off because the Byzantines had taken the city again. And the barbarians are kind of trying to get rid of them. So it's, but it's not the same thing anymore. Does that answer? Do you want to add anything to that, Angelo?
There's another question, actually, which is probably related. How do the people in the East identify themselves as Romans, and how did the Eastern Empire collapse?
When I said the Eastern Empire lasted for another 1,000 years, it wasn't exactly one empire. There were two, and it eventually collapsed in the 15th century, the second one, I believe. Yeah, so it's not exactly the Roman Empire. I like to use the idea of Rome moving, but then it becomes something else. So we mustn't get too carried away with it being, they weren't Roman anymore.
No, they definitely were not. Very good. I don't see any more questions popping out. So, Julia, I appreciate your generosity and the time that you spent with us this evening. I loved your story. I loved the thread you designed for us. I'll let you say goodnight and want to say that to everybody.
Yeah, thank you for listening, guys. I hope it's been interesting, and thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Ciao, Julia.
Ciao.